We'll go ahead and jump in to tonight's presentation. I'm so excited, and if it's okay with you, Ember, we'll just go ahead and start with kind of your overview of your project. Do you want to just talk through your project, or do you have some like slides you want to share? Oh, I think you're back. I can see you.
My service, like we're also like, I don't know if it's getting ready to storm here, but it like completely went silent.
Okay. Well, I can, yeah, repeat my question. Yeah, if you're ready, we can start with your presentation. If you're not ready, we can also go through our topic for tonight and do institutional food policy and then come back to you at the end. Um, how do you feel?
Either way is fine.
Okay, then I think we'll just go ahead and I'm so excited to hear more about your project. So we'll go ahead and let you, yeah, take it away. Do you want to share your screen or you just going to talk about your project?
I'll just talk about it because I
Okay,
couldn't get it to connect to go into any slides.
perfect, perfect.
So for my project, I decided to use our local senior center because a lot of our social service departments work out of there along with the senior centers. So my project is to work with WIC and Starting Points and Brighter Horizons, which is a kids club for their parents have some sort of addiction, whether it's alcohol or drug addiction, and so they come there while their parents are at meetings. And so my goal is to work with all of those three groups to form a garden for kids because they have to have like a reunification period, so they have to have visitation so they can do things in the garden and they can learn to work together and garden. But we also have a sandbox going in our garden, and around the sandbox will be herbs growing up the wall of our sandbox. So they can learn like that you can play in there and you can work in there. It's not all boring work for kids. They can play while their parents help them garden. Um, I have had Brighter Horizons. They're going to make a tic tac toe out of pollinators. So that way the kids can learn about the different types of pollinators that could be in our garden. I use the location because it's completely enclosed, so it's a safe environment. The kids can't run away or like go towards traffic or any kind of environment like that. And there also won't be like I won't have to use pesticides and things because it's not really out in like a wide open field. There would be nothing, no deer or anything can get into it. And everything we're doing is mini. So like I did orange hat tomatoes, so they grow miniature, so they can learn mini plants. If they don't have a location to garden, they can garden in containers and do mini plants. We have little lunchbox peppers and mini cucumbers and like lots of miniature sizes.
Oh,
So that way they're small for kids. So that way they think
yeah.
it's cool, it's interesting. And it doesn't overproduce because somebody's not there 24/7. So I'll be going in on the days that they're not there to harvest and share within those groups as well. So
Oh,
the kids actually are going to help clean the area and get it ready, them and their families. And then my husband's going to build all of our boxes because he does construction. And then they're going to help me put everything in and fill all the dirt and put all of the plants in. So they'll actually help me from the groundbreaking to finishing as well.
wow. Yeah, what a fantastic experience for those kiddos.
Yeah, so they range from like 18 months to generally like 8 or 9.
Yeah. And do you have a sense of like the size of the group you'll be working with?
Um, so my goal was to work with 5 different families. So like the one family does have 3 kids, 3 or 4 kids. So I could see lots of kids.
Yeah. And I love the family piece too. So that yeah, you're giving this knowledge to the kids and the adults and hopefully and yeah, setting up a system like that. They
Yeah,
can
lots of the families have never experienced any kind of gardening.
yeah.
Like when we've talked to them, they're like, "Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. We've never gardened. We've never been in a family that gardened. We would love to learn how to do that because a lot of them um, either are right at that criteria where they cannot get any assistance, or they are right under it, so they just get like a tiny bit of assistance. And so this will help them be able to cut back on their fresh produce spending.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, like you talking about growing the tomatoes makes me think about one of the things that made me fall in love with gardening, which was eating fresh cherry tomatoes out of my grandmother's garden because you can't beat it. They're so good.
Right.
I'm curious, like how did you learn about gardening? Like what made you excited about it?
So growing up, my grandparents always had a garden, and I was blessed to have great grandparents still alive, and they're still alive. So they also had a garden, and so that's just been something I've always done with my grandparents and great grandparents has been gardening. And then my mom and dad did not garden, so I would always go to my grandparents and garden and learn how to process my food and can it. So it's just something that I've always done, and my kids now do it too.
Mm, that's terrific. And I love that you're
I
giving
love your Facebook post of the kids.
They're always in the dirt digging and finding things and helping in the garden.
I was told by a very confident first grader at one point that the little tomatoes are not cherry tomatoes, they're maters.
I like that logic.
Yeah.
And can I add something about her project? So where she's putting in the garden, it's a courtyard with an island in the middle and sidewalks that go into the building on four sides. So there's actually four corner gardens. So thanks to her, they have approached the COS Garden Club that we are both members of. They have approached master gardeners, and they have approached or will be approaching, although I've already talked to Fox Club, and they want the four of us together to own a corner and put in the gardens so that the whole courtyard now has gardens of education in the corners. And, you know, Danielle Shuey was in the class, but due to her job, she's pretty much disappeared. Danielle's project, when she gets it submitted, hopefully next year, is going to be to take the garden club's corner and do edible natives. So the kids will be introduced to native plants around here that they can eat. Non-invasive, because we have wineberries here. Are you guys familiar with wineberries? I love them. They make wonderful jelly, but they are an invasive species. So she's going to be researching the right things for the edible natives in her garden. And I think the master gardeners have agreed in principle to participate. They used to maintain that whole courtyard. And so bringing us back into that is something they are supporting. And Fox Club I talked to on Sunday, and they said that would be a cool project. Limitations being the number of volunteers they have, you know, to help with the work. But it's such a small space. There's no reason why even two people can't take that on and do some cool things with it.
Right. I was glad that I got approved to do that, and then they expanded it to do the whole courtyard.
Yeah. The only thing is, you took the corner with no bushes.
That's right, I did.
Well,
And what she didn't tell you is that on Tuesday of this past week,
Yeah.
we presented our projects to the Senior Citizen Center, to the grandparents, to let them know what we're doing. And I used it as a mechanism for handing out my forms of interest to find my people who qualify for the program, which is focused on SNAP families. So that was a fun day there, fun morning.
Yeah. It'll be nice too, because then the senior citizens can get involved as well. and they don't feel like it's just a
Mhm.
kid's garden.
Yeah, I'm sure there's great expertise to pull from there. And please send photos of the like different stages of this project. I'm really excited to see your garden come together, Ember, and then the whole courtyard come together.
I'm
It's
excited. The courtyard actually, when you dig through all the weeds that they've let take over, has a working pond in it.
oh, whoa.
Yes.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can like
And they do
leave
have
that
a
in the
gardener to help, right?
like hopefully we can leave that there and do stuff around it. It would be a nice scenery inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds lovely. Well, thank you so much, Ember, for all your hard work on this project. And yeah, just so cool how the Panhandle and the Morgan County Garden Club has made these connections and just continues to grow great projects. So yeah.
Yeah. It's really nice that we're spreading.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, it just makes it was awesome to get to know Liz last year, and then I'm really happy that Liz has recruited like more folks from the garden club to come in, and then it's just been amazing to see the ideas that you all have come up with.
So Jenny said about
Well,
hosting a gathering here. The garden club, the CEOS, is actually working on our 9/11 memorial garden. So it'd be really nice once we get some more stuff done in there, like to do a gathering there.
Yeah. It makes it easy to work together. One, because everybody's so nice to work with, but the garden club members are in the COS Garden Club. Ember is in the COS Garden Club. The master gardeners are in the Foxglove Garden Club. So we're all in everything related to planting there is, including the community garden that we have and the 9/11 Memorial Garden, which is a garden for teaching people about gardening. Last year Liz did the presentation you showed last class
Right.
did the sensory garden, and we used it to teach the kids about the five senses in that, what's it smell like, what's it taste like, what's it feel like, those things. But we're also partnering with Blue Ridge Technical College ag class, who are starting a project to raise flowers and sell them out of a flower stall. And we're putting in raised beds that they can use. And then when they're done, they get rented to the local community. And we have 4 large beds going in the middle, which are all demonstration gardens. So Master Gardens will have one, the Garden Club will have one, and they are just as much a part of it, even though it's not a sanctioned Master Gardener project for anyone to participate in. So it's cool.
That's really cool. Yeah, terrific. I like Jenny. Jenny who's just messaged
I agree.
guys are great advocates for for Sprout School and the community development principles embedded within it. Well, thank you again, Ember, for sharing about your project. Does anybody have any questions for Ember before we jump into food policy? Okay, well then I will go ahead and share my screen, and in just a second, I will give the floor to Jenny because she is driving our conversation about food policy tonight because she's been working with farm to school policy, for a long time now.
Really just food policy in general for West Virginia.
Yeah.
It was way back when, before this life, when I had 17 jobs. I had 2, but I was the policy coordinator for the Food and Farm Coalition. And also for the Food and Farm Coalition, I was the farm to school coordinator for McDowell County. So Both of those could be full-time jobs by themselves. And both of them each had about 17 different hats, is what I will say. So you understand how quickly I burnt out, and after 3 years, I was like, I'm done with this. Bye. Going to FTU. But I do think that particularly in the community development space and in like the you particularly right now, I don't know if you guys have noticed what's happening in the news over the past, 100 days, because that's kind of where we're at. If we don't pay attention to policies, and at this point your politics don't matter, right? But if we don't pay attention to policies and decisions that are made, they get made for us, and we may not like that when they get made for us. And I am a very, true transparency here. I'm a very midline, slightly like I ride the center of true center politically usually, and right now I feel like I am the most liberal person ever sometimes. Just because of the way things are shaking down in DC. So that's kind of the framework I'm coming from. No judgment if you think any other ways. But I do think that in this moment, and it's especially important to talk about policy and to talk about it with the kids. And I don't want anybody, I know several of you have state level and federal level positions, or you work for universities that are land grants. Like, I don't want, none of you should lose your job because you're having a policy conversation. So like, and it's real, it's real. It can happen. So like, if that's a possibility, don't do that, right? But one of the things that we're talking about at the May gathering is actually how to have these conversations with kids and how to do some really fun hands-on activities so that they sort of understand why it's important. Like, it doesn't matter what the rule is, but like, why is it important to understand it is sort of kind of where I come from. So basically, like, yeah, it's been wild in the last I would say it is I'm so grateful that I work for a university that is the university that it is. I know Margaret is too, and that like we are allowed to have our own viewpoints, right? So I am very vocal about the cutting of AmeriCorps over the last few weeks because I was an AmeriCorps. And my university is like supporting me in that. They're not being like, you need to shut that down on social media. So like I'm super grateful. I know not everybody is sitting in that position. That is a very privileged position to sit in right now, particularly given everything happening. So the another reason you should care is policies, and we'll talk about what we mean by like a big P and a little p policy, but policies guide the rules that you follow. So individually, we have a set of rules. Those are called laws. Organizationally, you also have a set of rules. Those could be your bylaws if you're a nonprofit, or your governance laws if you're a university. And realistically, you should not want to break the law. So knowing what the policies are good so that you don't end up in like university jail or like actual jail, right? Um, and then the other thing that I will say is like it's also really good to just be an informed voter. And this is the point that I try to stress with the kids, particularly teenagers right now that are in this space. I think a lot of younger Gen Zs are in the space of like, why should we even care? Because every decision's been made for us and it's been made by a bunch of old people. And I think that that's like your upper high school kids right now. And I think a lot of your younger college, like that, like 16 to 24-year-old group right now. And I think a lot of conversations that I've had with those age groups lately have been related around like, why should you vote? Well, because this thing happened, you got mad about it, and the person that started it is now running for office. So do you want that person to continue to make those kinds of rules? And so, depending on how the policy shakes down or how they're enacted, it could change how you vote. And voting is one thing as an American citizen that we can do to kind of have a voice at some point. Now, whether it gets heard or not, you don't know. But at least you voted is kind of what I tell the kids. All right. So, and this is like based off of the training that I used to do for farmers. So we used to take, well, they still do, but when I worked for Food and Farm Coalition, we would take local food and farm day. We would take about 50 to 100 farmers to the Capitol, and they would meet with the West Virginia Capitol, not DC. They're getting ready to take a bunch to the DC Capitol. That's why Cardell actually couldn't join us tonight. He is their current policy coordinator. But we used to take them, and they used to meet with their constituent or with their delegates and their senators about policies related to agriculture or foods or transportation in some cases, because that also affects agriculture. And so the interesting thing, and I'll tell some stories as we get through this, but the interesting thing is like a lot of those meetings laid the groundwork for a lot of rule changes that happen that are making it easier to do agriculture in the state, which is really cool. So when we talk about big P, and this is like straight out of like political science, like mumbo jumbo, but when we talk about big P policy, these are like public rules, regulations, and laws that govern society. And so these are the things you have to follow or you get in trouble. So for example, a speed limit would be a big P policy. Is think of it as the law of the land. And as we go through example policies, we're going to talk about whether they're considered big P or little p, and some of them are kind of both. Little p, these are either informal or internal policies of an organization or school or et cetera. And so an internal school policy of like showing up on time is actually a big P policy, because if you don't show up on time, you get a tardy, which is the equivalent of, some sort of punishment. But an internal policy could be something like, we serve broccoli on Fridays. That could be an internal policy. Nobody's going to jail if they don't serve broccoli on Fridays, but it's written down that you serve broccoli on Fridays. West Virginia Wednesdays are a great farm to school policy that exists, that is a little p policy. And what that does is just encourages child nutrition directors to source an entirely West Virginia based meal for Wednesdays of their menu. And I mean, some of them do it, some of them don't. Some of them manage it once a month, some of them manage it once a year. And every little step is in the right direction, but none of them are like getting in trouble if they don't do it. It's there to encourage it. All right. So I basically broke things down by federal, state, and then like little p local stuff. And so federal, and these are listings, and I'm going to like talk a little bit about them. So federal policies and rules. The other thing I will say about policies is every time something is enacted, you have to look at both the good side and you have to look at the bad side, right? So there are benefits and there are drawbacks of every single policy. And that's how you make your decision based on like, is this good for me or my organization, or is this not? I think a lot of people get hung up on like, this is 100% good, this is 100% bad. And the first one I have here, the repeal of this, is actually a perfect example of there actually are some like solid points in West Virginia for why this like repeal of this federal funding was not a bad thing. So local food for food banks and local food for schools funding policies, those were not that set aside. So that was a big P policy during the Biden administration that set aside a huge amount of money for both food banks and local school districts to purchase local foods, to either have in their food banks for give out or to actually have on the school nutrition menu. And what I will say is that this is the one everybody's up in arms about right now. This is the one that you're seeing go across your headlines, that like, if you ever see things like farm to school is dead, farm to school is gone, they're talking about this policy, which is not actually farm to school. It's a purchasing policy, which like it does affect your farm to school purchasing, right? So Travis and Cabell County can no longer purchase like $3 million worth of beef, right? So like it is a thing. But what I will say is something that's interesting in states like West Virginia. So local food for schools funding, only 13 counties out of 55 were actually taking advantage of it. So let's start there. The reason that the others were not taking advantage of it is they didn't have access to farmers. So they didn't have access to growers who actually had the amount of produce that they would need to purchase to make it worth their time, right? The last thing you want to do to like a child, you guys heard this, but like the last thing you want to do to a child nutrition director is give them more paperwork. This gave them more paperwork. And so if they didn't have enough farmers to really justify it, or an aggregator that would purchase from several different farmers, they didn't take part in it. So let's start with only 13 counties were using the local food for schools side. The local food for food banks, both of our major food banks were using it. One of those food banks was requiring contract farmers. And so if you grew pepper, and they were successful at it. So it's like, if you grew peppers, you could only grow peppers for that food bank. You weren't allowed to also grow peppers for the farmer's market or for your local school district or for this district over. They were operating like a corporate farm like a corporate farm buyer. And it in a part of the state that has the majority of farmers. And so in the I-79 corridor. And so they gobbled up all of these farm contracts at a very small price. And so when that funding disappeared, suddenly, here's the weird side of this. Suddenly our child nutrition directors have access to more farms because now the peppers that were supposed to go to that food bank can now go to child nutrition directors. And so the interesting thing is because only 13 counties were really relying on it, all the other counties are like, oh, now we have more produce to purchase from. And a lot of those 13 counties are also, doing that. But several of the child nutrition directors have said, we have access to farms that we haven't had access to for 4 years. And so that's a perfect case of like, yeah, it sucks in the long run, and it really isn't good across the United States that it got repealed. But in a state that doesn't have ag as a main economic driver, when you set up policies that are actually kind of competing for farmers, you haven't really done anything positive. So that's like an interesting thing to think about, I think. I like these things swirl in my head all the time. The next one, so that's a big P policy. The next one for federal policies and rules. So during the second Bush administration, there was incentivizing for local purchasing agreements. And so they would incentivize schools and prisons and universities for local. This is actually sort of what West Virginia's local purchasing agreement was built off of. But they would incentivize them either financially or in other ways to purchase local. And the interesting thing, this was a small P policy. Nobody went to jail because they didn't buy beef from local farmer. But what it did was make it easier to purchase that, and then they would get a kickback. And that continued all the way through like that administration, Obama, like it has been bipartisan the whole way. And then it disappeared. I want to say it disappeared when COVID hit because so much of that purchasing then had to go to like whoever could give you wrapped, ready to eat foods. But that was a really good small P policy. The farm to school funding, so started by actually began during the Clinton administration, truly. So farm to school funding was not named Patrick Leahy until about 5 years ago. But interestingly, Patrick Leahy is the same person who is slightly responsible for all of the maple syrup funding. So I feel like it's weird that FGU takes advantage of all of this. But they basically it set aside money for for state departments of education. So not the Department of Agriculture, but the Department of Education to build and operate and incentivize farm to school programs through their child nutrition programs. Later on, they built out a grant program that was competitive that also included state departments of agriculture as well as school districts, et cetera. And we talked a little bit about that grant. So the sad thing is all of that right now is on hold. We're not sure if it's coming back or when it's coming back. It's under review and on hold. It's part of that mess. But interesting that is also a very bipartisan policy that was put in place. Also a small P. Nobody's getting in trouble because they don't operate a farm to school program. USDA commodity foods, that is straight USDA like in this actually is a big P policy. Not because if you don't participate, you get in trouble, but if you do participate, you have to do it correctly. And so what the commodity foods program does, and Sherry probably knows all about this insanity, but essentially it allows institutions, so schools, prisons, universities, food banks, et cetera, to access excess foods at the USDA level. They end up actually like often state departments of ag help navigate some of that for everything but the schools just go straight to the USDA. But you put in your order and then it shows up on a truck, and it's the commodity foods that are like available at a very small price, like pennies on the actual cost of the food if you were to get it somewhere else. What it does is help build nutrition, particularly in communities where that is like not a thing. And it helps increase the buying power of that agency or institution or whatever over to purchase like fresh foods and other foods. So things that are on the commodity food list often are like bulk flour, bulk rice, stuff like that. Beans. Occasionally there's like apples, right? Like we dealt with I don't know how many apples last year. I feel like WVU dealt with it, the department dealt with it. The farmers market says like everybody dealt with apples. And then this year was grapes, right? Like somebody you guys dealt with a lot of grapes, no. I know. I was like I kept seeing grape posts and I was like, what the crap are we doing? Um, but so occasionally there are fresh foods on that commodity list, and that's when you start to see people being like, show up and get a gallon of grapes, and you're like, okay, I guess I'm going. But it's usually shelf stable stuff, or at least stuff that can be refrigerated long term. Um, Farm to school census. Okay, so this is a federal policy. It is a small policy. No nutrition directors getting in trouble because they don't fill out their farm to school census. They're not. But what this does is it gave away. So there's an ag census. Everybody knows that there's an agricultural census. Oh, somehow it went forward. Make it go back. But oh, so there's an agricultural census that has been for years that mimics our census, like the national census. And the ag census is counting data related to agricultural producers by county. And so the USDA said, well, if we're going to count rate, we need to like find a way to quantify all of these farm to school impacts. And so they put it on the school nutrition, like whatever the division is that's managing nutrition for the schools or for the district. So it could be a county, it could be a region, it could be a whole state. Alaska, for example, it's the whole state reporting as one entity. So it puts it on them to report their numbers and fill it out. And then it goes into this is where you hear things like right now, West Virginia is ranked #2 for local sourcing in the whole country, which is wild to think about, but we're really good at it. And so the more you can encourage folks to actually like fill this out, the better off you are. I did a deep dive today to see about West Virginia, and I was like, there are 6 counties that don't report it, and 3 of those counties I know purchase over $1 million of local food a year. So we could be #1. Right. We could. I'm gonna kill Mon County. Mon County's one of them. I'm gonna kill them. Right. So, you know, Sherry, we got to figure this out. I don't know if you need to go sit in the nutrition director's office. I don't know. Cabell County's another. Like, good Lord. But at any rate, a ton of and I know why, right? They're so good at their jobs that they're not actually like they're so busy doing the job that they're not actually reporting the numbers. I know what's going on. Like, hello, I sat in the McDowell County office and filled his out every year. Like, I get it. I get it. The Farm Bill is a big P. It is a giant P. So it comes around. The Farm Bill has everything in it. That's all I'm going to say. It says this is how SNAP is going to be used. This is how much is allowed to be used. These are the thresholds. Most of the Farm Bill money is actually dedicated to the SNAP program and to WIC, right? And so the majority of the Farm Bill is going to ensure that people have nutrition that do not normally have access to nutrition and all the laws and governance around that. So if you use SNAP and then you do it illegally, the Farm Bill will not come after you, but somebody will. There are auditors that will figure that out, right? And there are many, many conversations about the misuse of SNAP. There are many, many conversations about the misuse of WIC. We're not going to get into those. I mean, it happens. It's also such a small percentage based on the amount of money that's being spent that I'm just sitting here going, the amount of time and effort it takes to find when it happens is probably not worth it. That's the realistic engineer viewpoint of it, is like you're going to spend more money paying the auditors than you are actually like saving from finding it. The Farm Bill also governs all the U.S. Forest Service spending, and so all of those positions are governed by the Farm Bill. It also governs all USDA grant programs, and it also governs a lot of the funding that goes to your land grant extensions. And so that's the majority of the categories that make up the Farm Bill. It is a massive bill. Right now, they're trying to cut it by 75%. So I will be interested to see who survives and who doesn't. That was the latest federally I saw, which was a couple weeks ago. I'm looking forward to an update. Right. The value-added producer programs for farmers, that's a federal policy. It's a little p, right? So these are grant programs that are set aside for farmers to be able to access that want to like take like strawberries and make jam. So it pays for their equipment, etc., to be able to do that. Um, another federal policy rule to follow. So NRCS high tunnel for producers, that's one that most people are familiar with, where like farmers can apply for a cost share program where they spend a certain amount, and then NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, puts in to get the rest of it, and they get a high tunnel or other. There are many things you can get with it, but a high tunnel is the example that a lot of farmers, and particularly farmers who produce for farm to school, take advantage of. And I just thought of one that's like huge, that's a huge P, is any of the FDA FSMA rulings. So any of your food safety rulings are big P left and right. Companies get fined. Big companies get fined when they screw up. They're clawing back a lot of those regulations right now. So I will be interested to see what FSMA looks like in 2 months, and what our food supply looks like at that point. The latest is that they are no longer, because they don't have the people to do it, they're no longer testing milk once it gets to the store. And so typically every so often they would have a person go in to test that would pull gallons of milk and like test to ensure that like the expiration date was correct and that the product was safe and that there wasn't anything extra in it. A lot of that has gone away, primarily because they don't have the staffing to handle it. And so I'll be interested to see what else happens in this realm. West Virginia may be leading the way because we have some of the like although they're hard to navigate, we have some of the cleanest like food production value added rules in the country, which is crazy to me sometimes. All right, there's federal policies and rules, state policies and rules. These are things you probably would have seen. So Big P's approved curricula for K-12. And so these are things like several years ago, we tried to get junior master gardeners an approved curricula for the K-12 level. It never passed because they were like, we're not sure you should be gardening in schools, or like every school couldn't have a garden. Like it was a wild time about 10 years ago at the legislature. And they're like, we think it's cute, but we're not sure it's useful. That was the biggest thing. So at some point, I'm going to go in with a body of evidence and be like, bam. But so that's big P. That is so essentially curricula gets approved. So there's becomes a list of curricula get approved, and then that goes to the county. The county gets to decide. If the county doesn't decide one of those curricula and doesn't file a waiver, they get in trouble. So that is a big P policy. Approved programming for ProStart, etc. My dog is barking. Please stop barking. He's there are guests in the guest house next door right now, so he is wanting to go say hi. And they're the people that have been judging our university for 2 days over our accreditation process, so he can't go say hi. That's where we're at. Side note. So approved programming, so things like ProStart, which counties get ProStart, those are actually decided at the state level, not the county level, because they have so much funding for specific programs. The same with like ag science programs, like all CTC programs are governed at the state level based on how many they can offer, and then the counties have to apply to offer them. And the way that they apply to offer them are things, they'll be like, well, we have 22 students that say they want to be chefs, right? So then, yay, you get a ProStart. So that's kind of how those decisions are made. FFA funding decisions are decided at the state level. Again, this is like, we have this amount of money, we have these many kids interested in FFA in these counties. Where do we decide to put programs? That's a little key decision. Nobody's going to really get in trouble for putting an FFA in the wrong county. State purchasing agreements, and we'll go into detail about this in the next slide. So the Fresh Food Act, which says that 5% of all food purchased for institutional use in the state of West Virginia must be sourced locally and from the state of West Virginia, which has created headaches as well as open doors. And we can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of that here in a minute. Cottage food value-added processing rules. This is what I was alluding to. So there are very strict rules on how to produce a thing. So jams, pickles, jellies, like what requirements you need to have to be able to do that. And if you don't follow those rules and requirements, then and you're trying to sell at a farmer's market, then the Department of Ag comes and takes your product off the shelf, right? Sherry's the bad person in this case. She's not regulatory. She's business development. Um, if you try to sell at a retail place and you don't have the appropriate things, you didn't get it tested at Virginia Tech to say it's safe, you don't have your classes, you don't have any of that, then the county health department can come and be like, oh, sorry, all these pickles gotta go, bye. And so that's a big P. That's a big P. Like you're not gonna go to jail, but you're gonna get in trouble and your product goes away, so you're not making money on it. Um, State specialty crop funds. This is one that I think that a lot of our farmers are dealing with, and a lot of the nonprofits that work with farmers deal with. They're managed, they're federal funds, so they're a big P at the federal level. They come to the state manages them at a small P level, because again, nobody's required to apply for them. But if the department screws it up, then the feds come after them. And that has happened, not with this administration, I will say that, not with this administration, but previous administrations, like 10 years ago, prior to Leonhardt administrations, it happened a couple of times where they failed an audit. And so our state specialty crop funds were not necessarily like absolutely disastrous, but like they definitely were like, we need some oversight. And so there for a little bit, we had like both. We were managing one at West Virginia State when I was there, and we would have both the state person as well as the federal specialty crop person, and that was a crazy wild time. But that's what happens if you screw that up. So yeah, Ember, they're very strict. Do not put the buttercream. No buttercream at all, unless you are keeping it in a fridge. Yes. It's crazy. Yes, Sherry, yes. All right, so we're going to talk about the institutional food system procurement policy, which is a very fancy term. I know, no cream cheese. It's yeah. All the good baked goods are actually not allowed on cottage food, is what I've discovered. So West Virginia State Legislative Code, and the Fresh Food Act. So what they basically say, oh, we're like debating value added rules. Give me a second. You can't. We need to tell the regulatory people that, even though they're probably the ones that set the rule, all of regulatory needs to know that, is what I'm going to say there. All right. So basically what the Fresh Food Act said, and the interesting thing, like the cottage food bill, so Food and Farm was kind of instrumental in like getting the ball rolling. But because the Food and Farm Coalition, I mean, I don't think this is a big secret. They're a pretty like left of center organization as far as politics go. They're not like everybody needs to be organic progressive, but they're pretty progressive as far as like food security and kind of food economics. But they work with the constituency that is primarily conservative, and of course, our legislature has been conservative for years. And so they got the ball rolling, saying, we need to find a way to like make sure cottage food works for the state of West Virginia. We need to like clarify the rules. We need to make it cleaner. We need to do this. We need to do that. So that they, plus the Farmers Market Association, kind of got the ball rolling, drafted the first draft, and then like 3 years later, it took a wild turn. Like if it almost passed. And then finally, 3 years later, what ended up having to happen was this think tank from Northern Virginia came in and said, we'll take it and we'll run it and we'll turn it into like very traditional conservative economic language. And so, of course, we were like, go for it. Good luck. And by gosh, it passed. And so the same thing is kind of what happened with the Fresh Food Act is like, and so I think this is really, really an interesting case in saying like, maybe your language is the problem. It's not what you're trying to do that's the problem. Which is pretty common. If you speak economic development, you're going to go a lot further with our legislature than if you go in and speak food security. Let's just start there. But basically this said that by July 1st of 24, so last year, each state-funded institution, and so these are your public schools, these are any of your state-run hospitals, the WU hospital, like mecca of West Virginia now, prisons, higher education facilities, and so WVU, West Virginia State Marshall, and state parks must purchase at least 5% of its food from West Virginia producers. They gave a little bit of ramp up time. They were much harder on the schools than they were anybody else. They were like, because the nutrition directors are turning in their purchases each month. So it's easy to count that. So they were much harder on the schools than they were any of these other institutions. And what I will say is I do not know a school district that's not in compliance with this now. Now, the ways that they're in compliance are somewhat creative. Sometimes it is related to fluid milk and protein. It is often, in a lot of our smaller school districts, it is the fluid milk purchase as well as the protein purchase. And so the proteins could be anywhere from like eggs, hamburger, etc. Because they often do not, the thing that this Fresh Food Act ignored was the fact that like we don't have enough produce farmers in the state to be able to source 5% of our food bill for these institutions in produce, right? And so a lot of folks are doing it with fluid milk and protein, because we're a chicken and beef state. Like, let's just be real. We're a chicken and beef state. Eastern Panhandle in particular, it is mostly chicken purchases, right? Because they can get it at a good rate because it's right there. The contract farm is right there. It's being produced in West Virginia and it counts. What this did was actually bring, yeah, Noel, like we've been talking about it for years and it just went into policy last year. And I think the interesting other thing is like the sunset date on it was this year. So it was like, we're going to try it we're going to make you get there. We're going to try it for a year and then we're going to stop it. Now, thankfully, I do believe that our legislatures, like, because our legislature ignored a lot of things this time, they also ignored this. And so it never actually got its full sunset. Like, I think it is still in place. But even if not, I also feel like most of the people that are doing the purchasing for all of these entities are so used to it at this point that they're just going to keep doing it. It's not killing their budget anymore. So they're good. That was the biggest thing. Everybody was like, we're not going to be able to afford it. And I'm like, you do realize that you're not going to have to pay travel costs for like lots of stuff, right? And so that's the state act that governs your county food purchasing. County level requirements, I mean, most of you are in different counties. They vary by county. And I know Andy talked about this, but like every county is slightly different. But the things that are true, everybody has to be registered as a vendor for the county where you're selling. Those of you that are working directly on local sourcing, and I don't know if that's many of you, but if that is a thing you want to take on at any point. So for example, if Ember's mini vegetable garden, like by mini, I mean tiny things, does really well, and there's a daycare that's like, hey, we want to purchase this, and it's a state-run daycare, which is highly likely given that she's at the WIC office, right? They would have to sign up to be a vendor, like the garden would, and that's okay. So this is talking through kind of how a school nutrition director or a daycare director or whatever could purchase from a school or purchase from a school garden. So they just have to sign up as a vendor, basically. In McDowell County, what we ended up doing was we created a whole, because we didn't want to have each school be its own vendor because that was going to be insane with 9 schools. We basically created a separate business that became the vendor, but really it was the school gardens. And that's how we did it. But there are many ways to solve that. If you're working with like one major school, like let's say that like you're in Doddridge County where there is literally K-12 and it's in like one school complex except for, one thing, then like you could totally just be like Doddridge County High School is the vendor and also they're the recipient. And so it's a really interesting way to like translate money from one spot to another. And then like they can use that for other things. It also teaches entrepreneurial skills, which is really cool. The thing I will say is make sure you understand the invoicing procedures for your county. I do not know how many farmers I sat next to in McDowell County that would come in, we got them to the point that they were bringing their vegetables correctly, right? So they would bring them packed the way they're supposed to be. They would bring them like not wrapped in random stuff. Like we got the vegetables in the right way and very pretty and lovely. But then they would not be able to invoice correctly, right? They would be like, yeah, here it is on a post-it note. I don't know how many invoices came in on post-it notes, right? I collect people who hand me post-it notes is what I've learned. Because I have a research director who also hands me things on post-it notes. But like they would be like, yeah, there's 17 apples and this. And I would be like, well, how much do you need for it? And they would be like, I don't know, $25. And it's like, oh my God, like we need to talk about what an invoice is. And so there's a lot of hand holding, particularly farmers who have never had to do this. Like if you have farmers that are primarily farmers market vendors, and all of a sudden they're selling into a very stringent system, and it's not that the system is hard, it's that they've never used the system, and you can't expect them to just pick it up and go with it. And so one of the things that Perry and I worked on for like 2 years was a boot camp for new farmers that were selling into the Southern coal fields. That was basically like, and it was like Mercer, McDowell, Wyoming County. And it was kind of like, all right, these three nutrition directors have agreed to do the same invoicing procedures and the same everythings. Now we need to train the people that are selling into them. And so we did a lot of hand holding. I did a lot of sitting in the floor with farmers and Perry at the child nutrition director level and saying like, all right, what's your price? Like blah, blah, blah. The other thing that I'll note is like child nutrition directors don't want to haggle a price and farmers do, which is weird. Like most child nutrition directors are like, just tell us how much you need and we'll pay you. And the farmers are like, but don't you want to haggle with me? And it's like, no, they don't have time for this. Like literally just tell them a price. So that's a big like thing to think about. Um, some opportunities usually end up bid out. And so if it's over, and this is state code. This is a big P state code. If the bid, if they think that the vendor is going to rack up over $5,000 in a year, it has to be bid out. And so, for example, let's take a big school district. Let's take Kanawha County, which is a huge school district. And they say, we want to source our apples locally. You'll see in the newspaper in all the counties around Kanawha, and you'll see kind of on the internet, particularly in the Eastern Panhandle, because guess where most of our apples are grown, requests for bids for like bushels of apples, really pallets of apples, right? So that are going into the school system. And so essentially you have to teach the farmer how to go through a state bidding process. What I will say is we're trying to change that. We're trying to up that limit to 10,000. That's one of the things that Food and Farm Coalition wants to take on if the insanity of food security ever stops. Because it's really hard. It's really hard for a farmer to understand that like they essentially have to do like a contract bid to provide apples for their county school district. So we're trying to like help that threshold along. And that's something that like the farm to school network group that's like started to form for the state has identified as a real need. And so Food and Farm was like, well, we'll take it on in a few years. We can't do it right now. We got to do the research. But essentially, this is like protecting single sourcing. So it's protecting like you always going to like your dad who's a farmer for the apples for your county. And then some of the contracts do not have, some you don't even have to have a contract. Like in some counties, as long as they know you're coming and you have an invoice, you don't have to sign a contract. But essentially a single delivery of apples for a single day event at a school, because it's not part of the lunch program, would not have to be bid out. Because it would be a totally different contract. So that gets like, that's just like communication. And then the other thing with county level purchasing is like the wait time for payment, it changes. Most of your larger counties are like 7-day. McDowell was between 14 and 21 because they cut checks once every 2 weeks. So it's like, just figure out what the schedule looks like and communicate that clearly to your farmers. If you're working with farmers, if you don't communicate that to your farmers, this is where most of the friction actually is, because farmers who have always basically sold in a farmer's market or even a restaurant setting expect payment when the produce shows up. The state cannot do that. The county cannot do that. WVU cannot do that. Noelle can do that because she has a P card. And she's using it for demos. But WVU as a whole cannot do that. But, I think the biggest thing with these 3 bullet points is just like be proactive, get ahead of it. If you decide local sourcing is important and that's a thing that you want to work with on the farm to school side, figure out the rules for your area and like be the biggest advocate ever for those rules and those systems. And that'll help the farmers get on board. All
Okay,
right.
incredible. I learned a lot, as I always do, when I hear Jenny talk about things that she's passionate about. So,
I'm actually not that passionate about policy, but it's important. That's what I'll say.
well,
Um,
yeah, you think of you as so passionate about the systems driven
this
by
is true.
policy. Yeah,
This is true.
yeah. Um,
All
well,
right, and then the last slide, I know it's 8 o'clock, so like if you guys need to go, you can. But these are just like little P examples you can do, right? So like nobody's going to jail, nobody's getting fined, nobody's getting in trouble. But these are policies that you could put in place that like help advocate and help push farm to school forward. And so things like we'll serve a rainbow every day of food, that comes in often in early childhood or K2. So like they'll be like, yeah, we're gonna put a rainbow on the plate every day or on Tuesdays or whatever, the West Virginia Wednesdays, but for rainbows. Um, only serving water in the classroom, that's one I've seen really common, particularly recently. Garden rules for the school garden. That's little policy examples that you can talk about with your students, and with your kids, right? It's like we're gonna write policy and they're gonna freak out and then you're gonna be like, we're gonna write the rules for the garden. And then they find out that that is the policy. Classroom rules, things like everybody bringing their own water bottle to summer camp, also small policy. And what I will say here is like, you guys have the authority to make policies in your spaces, and those policies count. And so when somebody comes forward and says, okay, how many policies did you have a part in for local food? You can count these. They're policies. Now, nobody's getting in trouble, but they're still policies. And I would actually say that they're probably more important because people respond better to like incentivized things than they do being slapped on the hand. Yeah.
amazing. Many thanks. We'll pause here. There are, again, I know it's 8 o'clock. There are a few quick announcements at the end of tonight's session, but I just wanted to pause and see if people have questions for Jenny. And I have one, while other people might be thinking of questions. How do you keep up with current policies, changing policies? Like,
I'm a nerd.
you're a nerd, is that what you
I'm a
said?
nerd. I am every 2 to 3. Okay, so part of it is one of my closest friends in the state of West Virginia is Spencer Moss, who is, of course, the director of the Food and Farm Coalition. So at least once a week, I get a lot of memes about food policies. But what the other side to this is I think it's crucially important to understand the rules and why they're the way they are. And so every few weeks I will just check. I still can't get out of like not following when session happens, right? I'm like in mid-January I get real antsy and I'm like, all right, what are we doing? What are we doing? So it's like policy coordinator Jenny comes back out to play and I pay attention. Um, Good places to look, particularly for federal policies. I mean, you guys are getting inundated with information right now about federal policies. Some of you may be too inundated and you've stuck your head in the sand, and I respect that. But doing like even just doing a Google search for like farm to school policy will pull up, and then looking at news. Don't look at the Google files, look at the news and look at the headlines and see what's happened, right? You can do the same thing with like local procurement policy. And then in West Virginia, it's pretty like the Department of Ag's Facebook page is honestly a great source of information. I roll my eyes at it sometimes, but anytime something changes, they're on it. And they're very like it might take them a while to get on it, but they're on it and they explain it very well. Their comms people are actually really great at that. And then the same with like State Department of Ed is not as cool with that, but it's also a piece where I'm so embedded in this work that if I don't pay attention to it, I like I want to make sure that I have the right information, so I'm not telling people the wrong thing. So like you'll notice I didn't give any specific county requirements because I'm pretty far removed from knowing those now, right? I could give you McDowell's requirements like 3 years ago, but they've changed.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I will just say that the National Farm to School Network
Uh,
puts out a weekly newsletter, and they always have a section dedicated to policy. And it's just kind of
They
quick.
do state and local policy too. Like they'll highlight state policies that
Yes,
make it.
always.
Yeah.
And it's like
Yeah.
they'll point out West Virginia, they'll point out New Jersey. Like they jump kind of all over the board. And I think that is a great because it can feel like overwhelming. There's a lot of information out there. It's like, how do I find digestible information? And for me, the Farm to School Network's newsletter and website have been really
Whatever you do, do not look at legislative code.
good.
That is the kiss of death, I think, for me. Like don't yes, that's where the actual rules are and where the actual language is. And so if you have questions, it makes sense to go back and look at it, but don't look at legislative bill code because it will exhaust you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And on that note, like someone has done the exhausting work of combing through legislative code at within the National Farm to School Network. So you can get on their website and click on a state and then see what farm to school policies are happening in that state with just like a quick one-line description along with a citation for whatever part of the code the policy comes from. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for sticking with us. You all have heard about our Farm to School Network meeting ad nauseum at this point, but it is coming up in 2.5 weeks on Saturday, May 17th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I just wanted to pause here to see if anyone has any questions about it rather than give you all information because you've heard a lot of it at this point. Okay, great. I know we have chatted at previous Sprout School
So
meetings. Oh yes,
we can come in on we can come in on Friday.
yes, yeah, that's great. And yeah, and we'll probably we could depending on what time you're coming in. There's a great Italian restaurant in Franklin, so we could get pizza or pasta. So yeah,
Well, that was my next question.
yeah, yeah,
Jenny alluded to a get together on Friday night,
yes.
I think, in the last meeting.
Yes, as long as if we have folks coming in on Friday, then what we did at the previous one is we just had pizza and people came and hung out. So that sounds like a great plan for this
Yep.
year.
Good. I'll be registering tomorrow.
Okay, fantastic. Happy to hear that. Okay, and on that note, we're continuing on things happening in Sprout School. Tonight is week 15 of Sprout School, our second to last meeting, and our last meeting is happening in 2 weeks. And most folks on this call are presenting about their projects in 2 weeks. And I saw that some people have already put their slides in the slide deck. So thank you all so much. Great photos. I don't know. I love so many of our Sprout School sessions, but this is definitely a highlight to get to hear you all talk about that awesome work that you're doing. And then we have the gathering, and then by the end of May, it's our goal to send out reimbursement checks and participation stipends. And on the note of participation stipends, I'll be sending you all an email with a request to fill out a W-9 form because our financial administrator needs those to process the participation stipends. So keep an eye out for that email coming up sometime in the next week or so. And then, on the final note, please submit your Learning Lab 4 after you complete the project. So there's a large swath of time. Kind of whenever you're done with it, we're excited to kind of see your evaluation of your project.
By October 1. Because we have to do the final. I have to do the Northeast SARE final report by November 30th.
Okay, this is great. From the grants administrator perspective, actually by October 1.
So by the time it gets cold again.
Yeah.
That's next week for us.
We're supposed to get cold again.
So Jenny, my program won't actually be over until October. Can I just close it out now and tell you what's happened so far? And
if you want,
okay,
I don't care. I know where to find you.
okay.
I mean, if you want to get to a stopping point, Noah, you can. And because you're in the special case that like you essentially are creating a toolkit for a never-ending program. And so at any point that you decide is a stopping point, you can totally close it out programmatically and just let us know what happened and what the future plans are. And the nice thing is if you stop now, you already have like 6 months of future plans.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, we'll let you guys go. Sherry, could you stick around for like 2 minutes at the end? And we've got a reimbursement question for you. Perfect. All right. Everyone else will say good night and goodbye, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for Sprout School Project presentations. Woo!
Right.
Bye.
Bye.